They called me the old woman paying for everything. Not Grandma, not Margaret. Just a label, etched in cursive on a name tag pinned to my chest like a scarlet letter. At my grandson's wedding, a day meant for love, laughter, and legacy, I became a punchline. But the thing about quiet women is, we remember. We remember the glances, the whispers, the hands that reach out only to take. We remember the family portraits where smiles now feel like masks. And we remember the moment the mask finally cracks, and we see the truth beneath it. So if you're still here reading this now, maybe something in you understands. Maybe, like me, you felt invisible in a room full of people who owe you everything. Well, friend, this story isn't just about betrayal. It's about becoming. About reclaiming dignity one no at a time. About finding your voice, even if it trembles, and speaking truths no one wants to hear. This isn't just my story. It might be yours too. So stay, because what starts with a name tag ends with a legacy. At my grandson's wedding, I noticed my name tag read, "The Old Woman Footing the Bill." I'm grateful you're here. Follow my story through the end and comment where you're watching from so I know how far this reaches. I've always believed that family celebrations should be filled with joy. My grandson Ethan's wedding was supposed to be one of those picture-perfect days, the kind that lives in your heart forever. Instead, it became the day I realized how my family truly saw me. That morning, I took extra care getting ready. I'm 67, not one to dwell on looks, but I wanted to feel beautiful. I wore a soft lavender gown that Thomas, my late husband, had always adored. I styled my silver hair with extra care and dabbed on the perfume he'd gifted me for our final anniversary, 3 years before cancer stole him from me. "You look radiant, Margaret," I whispered to the mirror, imagining Thomas saying it. I could almost hear his voice, feel his presence. The ceremony at Gracewood Chapel was lovely. Ethan looked dashing, walking down the aisle, joy lighting up his face. My son Stephen stood tall and proud beside him. Even my daughter-in-law, Karen, looked genuinely moved. For a moment, everything felt perfect. But that changed at the reception. I arrived at the Grand Oak Hotel's ballroom, heading to the welcome table, where guests picked up their name tags and seating assignments. A young woman greeted me with a smile as she sifted through the neatly arranged cards. "Here you are, Mrs. Sullivan," she said brightly, handing me the tag. I looked down, expecting it to read, "Margaret Sullivan, grandmother of the groom." Instead, in elegant cursive, were the words, "The old woman paying for it all." My hand stopped midair. "This had to be a mistake. Is something wrong?" she asked, noticing my face. I forced a smile. "There seems to be a mix-up." She leaned in, concern in her eyes. "Oh no, I'm so sorry. Let me check if there's another." "It's fine," I cut in softly, not wanting to cause a scene at Ethan's wedding. "I'll speak with my family." I pinned the hurtful label to my dress and walked into the ballroom, my face burning with shame. Had Ethan approved this? Stephen? Karen? Who thought this was appropriate, or even remotely funny? Throughout the cocktail hour, I tried to keep up appearances, chatting with other guests who either didn't notice the name tag or were too polite to bring it up. But then I caught a conversation that chilled me to my core. "Did you see the groom's grandma's name tag?" someone whispered with a laugh. Karen said they thought it'd be hilarious. Another voice chimed in. "Apparently, she's just their personal ATM." I stepped away quickly, my hands trembling. Just then, Stephen spotted me across the room and waved. "Mom," he called out, his voice rising above the music. "Come meet the Harringtons. Dad used to golf with Ben." Reluctantly, I walked over. Ben Harrington looked vaguely familiar, probably one of Thomas's old business acquaintances. "Mom, this is Ben and Lisa Harrington," Stephen said, then added with a chuckle, "our walking bank account." Lisa's smile faltered as she glanced at my tag. Ben's face shifted into something like discomfort. "Margaret Sullivan," I said firmly, extending my hand. "Thomas's widow." "Of course," Ben replied kindly. "Thomas always spoke so highly of you. He was very proud." The conversation continued, but I barely registered it. When the Harringtons moved on, I turned to Stephen. "What is the meaning of this?" I asked, pointing to my name tag. Stephen laughed. "Oh, come on, Mom. Don't be so sensitive. It's just a joke. Everyone knows you've got the deep pockets since Dad left you everything." "It's humiliating," I said softly. "Oh, please," he scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Lighten up. It's a party." Before I could reply, Karen appeared, glowing in her mother of the groom dress. "There you are, Margaret," she said brightly. "Has Stephen been showing you off? We want everyone to know who made this gorgeous event possible." She winked, and they both laughed. I excused myself and slipped away to the restroom, needing a moment to breathe. As I dabbed my eyes with a tissue, the door creaked open and a well-dressed older man entered, then quickly backed out, flustered. "Mrs. Sullivan, Margaret," he called gently from the hallway. "It's Martin Reynolds, Thomas's attorney. May I speak with you for a moment?" I took a breath, composed myself, and stepped outside. Martin had handled Thomas's estate with care and compassion. He had always treated me with respect. "I couldn't help but notice," Martin said, his gaze flicking toward my name tag and then back to my eyes. "And some of the things I overheard." I let out a tired sigh. "Apparently it's just a joke." Martin's face hardened. "It's not funny, and Thomas would have been furious." He hesitated, glancing around before lowering his voice. "There's something you should know. Something Thomas made me promise not to reveal unless it ever became necessary." He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a slim envelope. "This is a codicil to Thomas's will," he said gently. He added it shortly before he passed. My fingers trembled as I opened it. The legal wording was dense, but the message was unmistakably clear. Any descendant who publicly humiliated me would be disinherited from their portion of Thomas's estate, a fortune, it turned out, far more substantial than I had ever realized. I stared at Martin, stunned. "Why wouldn't he tell me this?" "He hoped it would never be necessary," Martin said softly. "He wanted them to treat you well because they loved you, not because they were afraid of losing money." I glanced toward the ballroom, where laughter and music floated through the open doors. They had no idea their cruelty had just cost them millions. "What do you want to do?" Martin asked quietly. I folded the document carefully and handed it back. "Nothing. Not yet. I need to see just how far they'll go." As I returned to the reception, the name tag on my chest felt heavier, but no longer from shame. Now it carried something else entirely. A growing clarity. A resolve to finally see my family for who they really were. The morning after Ethan's wedding, I sat at my kitchen table, still in my bathrobe, staring at the offensive name tag I'd placed in front of me. The calligraphy, elegant and mocking, read, "The old woman paying for everything." I traced the words with my finger, imagining how Thomas would have reacted. He rarely lost his temper, but when someone disrespected those he loved, he didn't hold back. "They've changed," I whispered to the empty room, as if he could hear me. Or maybe they were always this way and we just didn't want to see it. I stood and walked to the living room, drawn to the large family portrait hanging above the fireplace. It had been taken 5 years ago, at our 40th wedding anniversary. Thomas sat in the center, still strong then, despite the quiet warnings of the illness that would soon claim him. I stood beside him, one hand resting proudly on his shoulder. Stephen and Karen flanked us, while Ethan and his sister Madison, both teenagers then, smiled brightly in front. We looked happy. We looked like a real family. When exactly had that changed? The question clung to me as I made my morning tea. Maybe the shift had been slow, creeping in so subtly that I didn't see it until it was too late. The first clear memory came just 6 months after Thomas's funeral. Stephen and Karen had invited me to dinner, an unusual gesture at the time. They'd been unusually attentive, asking about my health, reminiscing about Thomas, and then, over dessert, the true reason for the evening emerged. "Mom," Stephen said, topping off my wine glass, "Karen and I have been thinking about redoing the kitchen. Nothing big, just some updated appliances, maybe new countertops." "That sounds nice," I said, still oblivious. Karen leaned in, her tone smooth. "The thing is, with the kids' college costs and everything else, we're a bit stretched right now." I remembered the silence that followed, the expectant expressions. "Are you asking me for money?" I had asked gently. "Not asking," Stephen said quickly. "It's just, Dad left you in a good place and we thought maybe you'd want to help the family out." That night, I wrote them a check for $30,000. It hadn't always been like that. In fact, just a few weeks earlier, I had gently declined when Karen asked for a small loan to cover a down payment on a vacation rental for their spring break trip. I thought it was a luxury, not a necessity. I'd offered a kind explanation, but the mood had changed. That Christmas, they arrived late left early, and barely spoke to me. There was no warmth, no hugs, just cold pleasantries. I remember sitting in the living room alone after they left, clutching the unopened bottle of wine I had saved for the occasion. The guilt gnawed at me so deeply that the next day I mailed them a check, not for the vacation, but for more. As if money could fix the emptiness I felt. Looking back, that was the beginning. Small asks turned into larger ones. The kitchen project expanded into a full home renovation. College support became brand new luxury cars for Ethan and Madison when they turned 18. Family vacations I was invited to join, on the condition I funded everything. I walked over to the hall closet and pulled out a box of financial documents. Sitting cross-legged like a schoolgirl, I began sorting through years of statements and canceled checks. The numbers stared back at me like cold truths. Over the past 3 years, I had given Stephen and Karen nearly $250,000. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Karen. "Margaret, are you home? I've been calling your cell." I glanced at my evening purse. My cell was still inside. "Yes, I'm here. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Karen said, her voice coated in that honeyed tone I'd come to know all too well. "Stephen and I just wanted to say thank you. Yesterday was incredible." "Yes, it was lovely," I replied. "Ethan and Lily seemed so happy." "They were," she gushed. "They're beyond grateful for your generosity. That wedding wouldn't have been possible without you." I closed my eyes, thinking about the $45,000 I'd written for the venue and catering. I was happy to help. "Actually, that's partly why I'm calling," Karen continued, her voice tightening into a falsely sweet register. "Lily's parents were supposed to pay for the honeymoon, but her father's business has hit a rough patch. They've had to pull out." "Lily is just heartbroken," Karen sighed. I could already sense where the conversation was going. "They were really hoping for 2 weeks in Bali." She paused, then added, "Stephen and I would contribute, of course. I mean, after everything we've spent on the wedding." "Everything they spent?" I had covered nearly all of it. "I'll think about it," I said, surprising even myself with the vague response. There was a brief silence on the line. "Well, they'll need to book soon to get the best rates." "I understand. I'll let you know tomorrow." After we hung up, I went back to my financial excavation. Thomas had always warned me about Stephen's relationship with money. "He thinks money solves everything," he once said. "But money without values? That just creates bigger messes." I hadn't understood back then, or maybe I simply hadn't wanted to. A knock at the door startled me. Through the peephole, I saw Michael, my younger grandson, shifting nervously on the porch. I quickly gathered the scattered documents and stuffed them back into the closet before answering. "Grandma," he said, stepping forward to hug me. At 21, Michael was tall like his grandfather, with the same gentle eyes. "Are you okay? I've been texting you." "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, giving him a warm smile. "Just a little tired after yesterday." "Come in." He followed me into the kitchen as I put the kettle on for a fresh pot of tea. Michael had always stood apart from the others. More grounded, less obsessed with status and appearances. "I wanted to say I'm sorry about yesterday," he said, settling into a chair at the table. "The name tag, the way everyone was talking, it wasn't right." A lump rose in my throat. "You noticed?" "Of course I noticed. So did a lot of people." He lowered his eyes. "I should have said something." I reached over and patted his hand. "It's not your job to fix your parents, but it is your job to know what's right." He looked up, straight into my eyes. "Dad and Mom, they've changed since Grandpa passed. Or maybe they were always this way and I just didn't see it. All they talk about now is money, your money, specifically." "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. Michael hesitated. "Last week I overheard them talking about your house. Dad said it's too big for one person and that they could help you downsize." The kettle whistled sharply, giving me a moment to process what I just heard. As I poured the hot water over the tea bags, my hands felt strangely steady. I thought about Martin Reynolds and the codicil to Thomas's will. I thought about the name tag, the never-ending requests for money, and now their apparent plan to push me out of my own home. "Grandma?" Michael's voice pulled me back to the present. "Are you sure you're okay?" I placed the teapot gently on the table and sat across from him. "I'm better than okay, Michael," I said, giving him a steady look. "I think I'm finally seeing things clearly. for the first time in years. "What do you mean?" he asked. I smiled, my mind settling into quiet resolve. "Just that. It's time for a few changes around here." As we sipped our tea, I found myself watching his face closely. Was Michael truly different from his parents? Or were the seeds of entitlement simply lying dormant, waiting for the right conditions to bloom? For the first time since Thomas died, the fog of grief and loneliness lifted, replaced by something colder and sharper: clarity. I wouldn't rush into anything, but I would be watching. Waiting to see who in my family actually deserved the legacy Thomas left behind. 3 days after the wedding, Stephen and Karen hosted a post-wedding brunch at their country club. I debated whether to attend, but curiosity got the better of me. I needed to know whether the name tag incident had been a one-time lapse in judgment or part of something deeper. I arrived at Oak Ridge Country Club in a simple yet elegant cream pantsuit, one Thomas always said made me look regal. Inside the private dining room, I spotted familiar faces: Ethan and Lily, Michael, extended relatives, and a few lingering wedding guests. "Mom, over here," Stephen called out, waving me toward the head table. Karen, radiant in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's rent, leaned in with an air kiss. "Margaret, you look lovely," she said, her tone laced with subtle surprise. "We saved you a seat right here." I took my place, next to Lily's parents, whom I barely knew, not near my grandchildren. The brunch unfolded smoothly at first: chatter, laughter, pastries, until Karen stood and gently clinked her glass. "If I could have your attention for just a moment," she said with a bright smile. "Stephen and I just wanted to thank everyone for being here and for helping make Ethan and Lily's wedding so wonderful." She paused. "And of course, a special thank you to Grandma Margaret, who has been beyond generous." All eyes turned to me. "In fact," Karen continued, her smile tightening at the corners, "we have a little surprise announcement." She gestured dramatically. "Grandma will be sponsoring Ethan and Lily's dream honeymoon to Bali." A small round of polite applause followed. I sat frozen, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. I had made no such promise. "Mom?" Stephen prompted, clearly expecting me to smile and nod along. I carefully set my coffee cup down. "This is the first I'm hearing of it," I said evenly, keeping my voice steady. An awkward silence fell over the table. Lily looked confused, then visibly uncomfortable. Mark stared down at his plate. "Well, we discussed it yesterday," Karen said, her voice tight with forced cheer. "Remember? You said you'd think about it." "Yes," I replied calmly. "I did say that, and I'm still thinking." Stephen leaned toward me, his voice just loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Mom, don't make a scene. We've already told them they can book the trip." Something inside me snapped, a quiet thread that had been stretched far too long. "I don't recall agreeing to fund a honeymoon to Bali," I said clearly, my voice cutting through the room. "In fact, I believe Mark's parents were originally planning to cover this expense." Mark's father shifted in his seat. "There were some setbacks with the business," he mumbled. "I understand," I said gently. "That happens, but I believe it's inappropriate to publicly volunteer someone else's money without their agreement. Don't you?" Silence. Karen's face flushed a deep red. "Perhaps," I continued, "Ethan and Lily might consider a more modest honeymoon, something within their means." Karen's head whipped toward me. "Their means?" she snapped, her voice low and sharp. "What about your means? Everyone knows Thomas left you more than comfortable." It was her tone, that blend of entitlement and resentment, that finally solidified my decision. "My financial situation," I said firmly, "is not up for public discussion, and neither are my personal choices." Stephen grabbed my arm under the table, his fingers pressing into my skin. "Mom, stop this. You're embarrassing us." I looked him in the eye as I calmly pulled my arm away. "No, Stephen, you've embarrassed yourselves." I stood, smoothing the front of my jacket. "Ethan, Lily, I wish you both every happiness, and I'd be happy to contribute to a reasonable honeymoon, but I'll speak with you directly in private." I turned to leave. And then, bless him, Michael stood too. "I'll walk you out, Grandma." In the quiet of the lobby, away from the stares and whispers, I finally let my composure slip. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my car keys. "Are you okay to drive?" Michael asked gently. I nodded, drawing in a long breath. "I'm fine, just a little rattled." He placed a hand on my shoulder. "You should be proud of yourself. That took guts." I looked at my grandson, really looked at him, and in that moment he reminded me so much of Thomas that it made my chest tighten. "Would you like to come over for dinner tonight?" I asked, the words slipping out before I had time to second-guess them. Michael smiled. "I'd like that." That evening, we sat at my kitchen table over a simple roast chicken dinner, the kind of meal Thomas and I used to share on quiet Sundays. For the first time in years, I found myself opening up. I told Michael about the past 3 years, the constant requests for money, the subtle, then not so subtle decline in respect. "I'm not surprised," he said sadly. "I've seen it happening since Grandpa passed." "It's like they see me as," I paused, "an ATM, he finished. He nodded. "And it's only getting worse." I looked at him closely. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "Last week I overheard them talking about your house again. They're trying to figure out how to convince you to move into Sunrise Acres, the retirement home." I froze. My home, our home, was my sanctuary, filled with a lifetime of memories. The thought of leaving it, not by choice but by manipulation, was gutting. "Dad said it would be better for everyone if you downsized," Michael continued. "He mentioned something about the market being hot and how they could help you maximize your investment." I felt a wave of nausea. They didn't just want my money, they wanted my home too. "Michael," I said, my voice steadying with a decision, "there's something you need to know." I was about to tell him about Thomas's codicil, his final safeguard, but before I could speak, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Stephen's car pulling into the driveway. "It's your father," I said quietly. Michael's expression hardened. "You don't have to answer it," but I was done hiding. "No," I said, rising to my feet. "It's time we clear the air." I opened the door. Stephen was already pushing past me into the hallway, his face flushed with fury. "What the hell was that stunt at the brunch?" he demanded. Then his eyes landed on Michael. "And you? What are you doing here?" "Having dinner with Grandma," Michael said calmly. "Something the rest of you might try doing without a price tag attached." Stephen's face darkened. "Stay out of this, Michael. This is between your mother and me." "No," I interrupted, my voice like steel. "If we're going to have this conversation, Michael stays. I'm done with the whispering and guilt trips. If you have something to say it. But say it out loud." Stephen paced the living room like a restless animal, anger radiating from every movement. "I've had enough of your attitude, Mom," he snapped. "First, you embarrass us at brunch, and now I find out you've been poisoning Michael against us?" I sat calmly in Thomas's old armchair, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Michael stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, watching his father with a mix of disappointment and steady resolve. "No one's poisoning anyone's mind," I said evenly. "We're simply acknowledging what's been happening in this family since your father passed." "And what exactly is that supposed to mean?" Stephen snapped. "You and Mom have been treating Grandma like a bank," Michael said before I could respond. "The name tag at the wedding, announcing the honeymoon without asking her first, talking about selling her house behind her back." Stephen's face flushed. "You've been spying on us?" "I've been paying attention," Michael countered. "Something you might try sometime." Stephen turned to me, his tone softening, the familiar, practiced calm he always used when trying to get what he wanted. "Mom, you're misunderstanding. We're just trying to help. You've always been smart with money, but you're not getting any younger." "I'm 67, Stephen, not 97, I interrupted, my voice sharp but controlled. "My mind is perfectly fine, and I'm more than capable of managing my own affairs." "But Dad left you so much." "Stop." I raised a hand, silencing him. "Thomas left me exactly what he intended to leave me. His estate is not some communal pot for the family to dip into whenever they please." The warmth vanished from Stephen's face. "So what are you saying? That you're cutting us off because Karen made a dumb joke with a name tag?" "I'm saying that from this point forward I will be making my own decisions about my money and my home. If Ethan and Lily want a honeymoon in Bali, they can save for it, like most young couples. If you and Karen want a bigger house, you can earn it." Stephen stared at me like I was speaking another language. Then he turned to Michael. "I want to speak to my mother alone." "I'm staying," Michael said firmly. "This is family business." "Exactly," Michael replied, "and I'm family." Something shifted in Stephen's face. Hesitation, calculation. He had always been able to manipulate me when we were alone. Guilt, grief, the pressure to maintain peace. It used to work, but not now. Not with Michael standing beside me. Fine, Stephen snapped, heading for the door. But this isn't over, Mom. Not by a long shot. After the door slammed shut, Michael let out a long breath. I'm sorry, Grandma. For what, sweetheart? For not speaking up sooner, for letting them treat you that way. I stood and wrapped him in a hug. You're speaking up now. That's what matters. After Michael left, I sat alone in the quiet of my home, thinking about Thomas, about the codicil in his will, about the family we had raised together. Had we missed something with Stephen? Had that entitlement always been there, just hidden under the surface? But the bigger question lingered. What should I do now? The answer came slowly, taking shape like an old photograph in a dark room. Instead of confronting Stephen and Karen with the codicil and forcing change through fear, I would wait. Because what I wanted was to see who they truly were when they thought no one was watching. I would simply let them keep revealing who they really were. Meanwhile, I would quietly begin reclaiming my life and my independence. The next morning, I called Martin Reynolds. Margaret, he greeted warmly. I've been expecting your call ever since the wedding. Yes, that's part of why I'm calling. I told him about the scene at the brunch, about Stephen's visit afterward. I need to understand everything Thomas left in his will, I said. Not just the codicil, all of it. There was a pause on the other end. Perhaps this is best discussed in person. Could you come to my office this afternoon? 3 hours later, I sat across from Martin in his well-appointed office, surrounded by law books and framed degrees, as he walked me through the full scope of Thomas's estate. The numbers were staggering. Thomas built several companies over his lifetime, Martin explained, and he sold them at just the right times. His investments were incredibly conservative, which meant they weathered every downturn without issue. I knew we were comfortable, I said quietly. But Thomas was a private man when it came to money, Martin said. He didn't believe in showing off. He always told me, she married me when all I had was potential and a rusty old Chevy. I never wanted Margaret to become the kind of woman who trades love for labels. I smiled softly, hearing Thomas's voice in those words. That sounds like him. As for the codicil, Martin continued, it's simple, but legally ironclad. Any descendant who publicly humiliates you forfeits their inheritance. The name tag at the wedding would certainly qualify, and the brunch? Most likely as well. I nodded, still absorbing it. But Margaret, Martin added gently, you don't have to decide anything today. The codicil remains valid for your lifetime. I understand, I said. But what if I wanted to make a few changes of my own, to my will, to how things are managed? Martin leaned in slightly. What did you have in mind? By the time I left his office, I had a plan. No dramatic confrontations, no ultimatums, just a quiet, steady reclaiming of my life and my power. First, I called my old friend Eleanor, someone I hadn't spent much time with since Thomas's death. We made plans for lunch the next day. Then I stopped by the community center and picked up a brochure for their adult education courses. Thomas had always encouraged me to pursue my love of painting. Maybe it was finally time. That afternoon, I sat at my computer and began researching small business loans. Michael had once mentioned wanting to open a bookstore after college, but he'd been worried about the startup costs. Supporting something meaningful like that, a true investment in my grandson's future, felt like the right use of my resources. When the phone rang and I saw Karen's name on the screen, I didn't answer. The old Margaret would have picked up right away, anxious about what demand or crisis might be coming next. But that version of me was fading. In her place stood a woman finally realizing her worth. Later, I listened to the voicemail. It was exactly what I expected. Margaret, it's Karen. Stephen told me about your conversation last night. I think there's been a bit of a misunderstanding. We've always had your best interests at heart. Stephen and I were thinking we could have dinner this weekend, just to clear the air. Oh, and Lily mentioned you might have reconsidered about the honeymoon. They really need to book soon to get the best rates. Call me back. I deleted the message without replying. Instead, I pulled out my checkbook and wrote a modest gift for Ethan and Lily's wedding. It was enough for a lovely honeymoon, perhaps in coastal Maine, not Bali. I tucked the check into a card with a heartfelt note wishing them a lifetime of happiness, then sealed the envelope. My quiet strategy had begun. No fights, no ultimatums, just quiet, unwavering boundaries. Thomas would have been proud. 6 months passed in a quiet blur of meaningful change. I enrolled in painting classes at the community center, reconnected with old friends, spent more time with Michael, who visited often. I also gave him seed funding for his bookstore plan, which was moving along beautifully. Meanwhile, Stephen and Karen's behavior swung between chilly distance and awkward attempts to reestablish their access to my finances. When silence didn't get them results, they'd show up, smiling too hard, bringing excuses to drop by. But inevitably, they'd steer the conversation toward money, a new home renovation, Lily and Ethan thinking of buying a house, their own early retirement goals. Each time I smiled and responded with the same phrase, "I don't discuss my finances." It became my mantra. Soft, polite, but firm. They didn't take it well. Karen's texts grew snippy. Stephen's phone calls became more aggressive. But I had discovered something priceless in my silence. Power. And I wasn't about to give it up. Today was my birthday, my 66th. Despite my protests, Michael had insisted on throwing a small family gathering at my house. "It's time they remember whose house this is," he'd said, his jaw set in a way that reminded me so much of Thomas. I spent the morning in my garden, carefully deadheading roses and finding peace in the simple rhythm of the work. The garden, like so many parts of my life, had become a casualty over the past 3 years, neglected while I catered to Stephen and Karen's endless demands. But now it was coming back to life, much like I was. By mid-afternoon, the house was ready. Michael had come early to help with the finishing touches. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked, arranging crackers and cheese on a platter. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, smoothing the folds of my new red dress, a bold shade I would have never dared wear before. Besides, it's just dinner. But we both knew it was more than that. This would be the first time in months the whole family would be under my roof. Stephen and Karen, Ethan and Lily, even a few of Thomas's old friends, including Martin Reynolds. The doorbell rang promptly at 5. Stephen and Karen stood on the porch, smiling in that too-tight way that always made me brace myself. "Happy birthday, Mom," Stephen said, handing me a bouquet of supermarket flowers. "Margaret, you look different," Karen added, her eyes sweeping over my styled hair, the subtle makeup, the confident red dress. "Thank you," I said simply, stepping aside to let them in. Ethan and Lily arrived moments later, followed by Martin and another couple who had once shared long evenings with Thomas and me over wine and laughter. I moved through the greetings and small talk with a poise I wouldn't have dreamed of 6 months ago. As we gathered around the dining room, I noticed Stephen's eyes roving, scanning the house, taking silent inventory. Karen's gaze, meanwhile, kept drifting toward the painting now hanging above the fireplace. A quiet landscape in soft pastels, one I'd painted myself. "Did you redecorate?" she asked, her voice tinged with something between surprise and disapproval. "Just a few updates," I said. "I've been taking painting classes." "Painting?" Stephen echoed, as if I'd said I was training to become an astronaut. "She's really good," Michael chimed in proudly. "Grandma's already sold 2 pieces at the community art fair." "Sold?" Karen blinked, baffled. "But why would you need to sell paintings?" I smiled. "It's not about need, Karen. It's about joy." An uncomfortable silence settled over the table until Mark broke it by asking about Michael's bookstore. "It's coming along great," Michael said with a smile. "Thanks to Grandma, I've finalized the business plan and started scouting locations." Stephen's head snapped up. "Thanks to Grandma?" he repeated. "What does that mean?" Michael met his father's gaze evenly. "It means she's investing in my bookstore." "Investing?" Stephen's voice rose a notch. "With what money?" "With my money," I said quietly. Stephen started to object, then stopped, glancing at the others in the room. "Maybe we should talk about this privately." "There's nothing to discuss," I said firmly. "I'm making my own financial decisions now." His face darkened. He looked like he might push further. But before he could, Lily jumped in with a story about their honeymoon to Cape Cod, a destination they had chosen after receiving my modest wedding gift. The conversation shifted, tension momentarily eased. After dinner, as we moved to the living room for dessert and coffee, Karen cornered me in the kitchen. "Margaret, what is going on with you?" she hissed under her breath. "First, you refused to help with the honeymoon. Then you go completely silent for months. And now, suddenly, you're throwing money at Michael's pipe dream? It's not a pipe dream, I said calmly. It's a sound business plan. Don't be naive. Bookstores don't make money anymore. He's using you. No, Karen. I'm supporting my grandson's ambition. There's a difference. Her eyes narrowed. Stephen and I have been talking. We think it's time you consider moving somewhere more manageable. Sunrise Acres has lovely units, and the money from this house could help all of us. There it was. The plan Michael had overheard, now spoken aloud. This house isn't for sale, I said, my tone sharpening. And my living arrangements aren't a matter of family consensus. Before she could reply, Stephen appeared in the doorway. Everything okay in here? Just wonderful, I said, lifting the cake I'd baked earlier. Shall we move to dessert? As I began slicing the cake, Stephen cleared his throat. Before we move on, he said loudly, there's something Karen and I want to discuss with everyone. My hand froze on the knife. This was not part of the evening I'd envisioned. We're concerned about Mom's recent decisions, Stephen said to the room. She's been making questionable financial choices, isolating herself and rejecting guidance from her family. The room fell into a stunned silence. We think it's time, he continued, to consider establishing a power of attorney. He continued, for her own protection. Martin Reynolds set his coffee cup down with deliberate care. That's a serious step, Stephen. She's giving away money to fund a bookstore. In the digital age, Stephen said flatly, as if that alone proved everything. And she's refusing to consider logical downsizing options. I felt an unexpected calm settle over me. This moment had been coming from the day I first said no. Your mother seems perfectly competent to me, Martin said, his tone measured. Disagreeing with her decisions doesn't make her incapacitated. You don't understand, Stephen insisted, his voice rising. She's always relied on Dad, and then on me, for financial guidance. Now she's suddenly making these impulsive, irrational choices. Enough, I said, placing the cake knife down. I am not irrational or incapacitated or in need of your oversight. Mom, be reasonable. I've been reasonable, I said sharply. For 3 years, I paid for renovations, vacations, cars, and a wedding. I let you treat me like a walking checkbook instead of your mother. I looked him directly in the eye. But that ends now. Stephen's face turned a deep, blotchy red. Is this what you want? He demanded, gesturing around the table. To humiliate us? To make us look like the bad guys in front of everyone? No, Stephen, I said, my voice quiet but unwavering. You've done that all by yourself. You selfish old woman, he snapped, pushing back from the table so hard his chair nearly fell over. After everything we've done for you. Karen tugged at his arm, suddenly realizing how they looked to everyone else. But Stephen was past caring. You think you can just cut us off? Dad would be ashamed of you. That's when Martin cleared his throat and said the words that changed everything. Actually, Stephen, he began, your father anticipated exactly this kind of situation. A thick silence blanketed the room. Stephen froze, mid-rant, as Martin reached inside his jacket and pulled out a familiar cream-colored envelope. Thomas added a codicil to his will shortly before he passed, Martin said to the room. He was concerned about how Margaret might be treated after he was gone. What kind of codicil? Karen asked, her voice shaky but loud in the silence. Martin paused, then turned to me with a quiet glance, asking for permission. I nodded. The codicil states that any descendant who publicly humiliates Margaret forfeits their entire inheritance, Martin said, his voice steady. This includes treating her with disrespect, attempting to control her finances against her wishes, or trying to force her from her home. That's ridiculous, Stephen sputtered. Dad would never. He did, Martin interrupted firmly, and as executor of his estate, I've been documenting the incidents over the past several months. Then he turned to me. Margaret, I have to ask, do you wish to enforce the codicil? All eyes turned toward me. I looked at Stephen and Karen, both pale now, their expressions tight with shock and rising horror. I glanced at Lily, who looked confused and quietly ashamed. Then I met Michael's gaze. His eyes held only calm support. Yes, I said, I do. Stephen collapsed back into his chair. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious, I replied. The name tag at the wedding, the announcement at the brunch, the constant money demands, and now this attempt to declare me incompetent? It all ends tonight. But our inheritance, Karen whispered. Is forfeit, Martin confirmed. Even mine? Lily asked, her voice small. Martin checked his notes. You were present for several of the incidents but didn't actively participate. However, you also didn't speak up to defend Margaret. Lily's eyes welled with tears. I'm sorry, Grandma. I should have said something at the wedding about the name tag. I reached across the table and gently took her hand. We all make mistakes, sweetheart, I said. The question is what we learn from them. So, what happens now? Mark asked, pulling Lily close. According to the codicil, Martin said, Stephen and Karen's share of Thomas's estate is now null. Half of that amount goes directly to Margaret. The other half, he continued, is to be distributed among descendants who have shown her respect and genuine care. All eyes shifted to Michael, who looked completely stunned. I didn't know, he said quickly, shaking his head. I swear, Grandma, I had no idea about any of this. I know, sweetheart, I said, my voice soft. And your grandfather would be so proud of the man you've become. Stephen shot to his feet again, his face twisted with rage. This is a setup, a conspiracy. I'll take it to court. You're welcome to try, Martin replied calmly. But the codicil is legally binding, and we have substantial documentation that the conditions have been met. Margaret, Karen said suddenly, her voice sugary and pleading, surely we can still work this out as a family? We never meant. Save it, Karen, I cut in. It's too late for that. So that's it? Stephen spat. After everything we've done for you, you're just going to cut us off? No, Stephen, I said, rising to face him. After everything I've done for you, I'm finally standing up for myself. There's a difference. The gathering ended soon after. Lily and Mark left first, offering awkward hugs and promises to call. Stephen and Karen stormed out without another word. Martin and the remaining guests excused themselves with quiet tact, leaving the house still and silent. Only Michael stayed behind, helping me clear the untouched dessert plates. You okay? He asked gently. I looked at him and smiled. I'm better than okay, I said. I feel free. 1 year later. I stood in the doorway of Chapter 1, the cozy bookstore Michael had finally opened in a beautifully restored Victorian house downtown. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows, warming the shelves lined with thoughtfully selected titles and cozy reading nooks. A small coffee counter, run by Michael's girlfriend Emma, offered locally roasted coffee and fresh pastries. In the children's section, a whimsical mural I'd painted stretched across one wall. A colorful forest scene filled with fairy houses and hidden woodland creatures. Twice a week, I hosted story time there for the neighborhood kids, something I never imagined myself doing before. Upstairs, the once empty apartment had been transformed. Not for me. I still cherished my home and its memories of Thomas, but for the writer-in-residence program Michael launched, using part of his inheritance. Just then, the bell above the front door jingled. Jennifer stepped inside, gently pushing a stroller. Grandma, she called, spotting me. I didn't know you'd be here today. Just dropping off some new bookmarks I painted, I said, smiling as I knelt to peek into the stroller. And who is this beautiful girl? This is Roberta, she said proudly, named after Grandpa. I reached in to gently touch the baby's hand. Hello, little one. Over the past year, Jennifer and I had rebuilt our relationship, slowly but with care. She'd made a real effort to connect with me, not through her parents, but on her own. Mark, calm and steady, had helped her find her voice. As for Stephen and Karen, after 2 failed attempts to challenge the codicil, they'd quietly relocated to Florida. Stephen had taken a job with an old business contact. We hadn't spoken in months, and I didn't miss them. Our communication with Stephen and Karen had dwindled to a few Christmas cards and the occasional second-hand update through Lily. Have you heard from your parents lately? I asked as Lily settled into a small corner table with baby Roberta. Mom called last week, she replied with a sigh. Same conversation as always, complaints about Dad's job, the house they had to settle for, how unfair everything is. I'm sorry. Don't be, Lily said firmly. They made their choices, I've made mine. Emma brought over coffee and warm scones, pausing to coo over the baby before returning to the counter. Moments later, Michael stepped out from the back room carrying a stack of new book arrivals. His face lit up when he saw us. Perfect timing, he said, joining us. I've been wanting to run something by you, both of you. He explained a new idea, expanding the store's community programs to include adult literacy tutoring and creative writing workshops for teens. It'll take reinvesting some of our profits, he added, but I think it's worth it. I think it's wonderful, I said, pride swelling in my chest. As they discussed the details, I let my gaze wander around the sunlit bookstore. This space, warm, welcoming, filled with purpose, represented more than just Michael's dream. It symbolized a new chapter for all of us. In the year since the codicil was revealed, I had rediscovered parts of myself that had been dormant for far too long. I'd made new friends, deepened my painting practice, and even begun to travel again. What started as weekend getaways turned into a 2-week art tour in Italy, where I met Claude, a widower from Boston with kind eyes and a dry sense of humor, who now called me every Sunday. Robert would have approved, I thought. Not just of the bookstore or the traveling, but of the boundaries I'd finally drawn. He had done what he could to protect me with that codicil, but in the end, I had learned to protect myself. A happy gurgle from Roberta drew me back into the moment. This was my family now. Not perfect, not complete, but real. And we were building something new out of what had been broken, something honest, something ours. What do you think, Grandma? Michael asked, nudging me gently back into the conversation. I looked at him, at Lily, at baby Roberta, our future, and at this bookstore born of trust, respect, and love, not obligation or greed. I think, I said, smiling, this is exactly where we're supposed to be. So the story is over, our wonderful friends. Are you still here at this hour? If you're really here, then something in this story must have touched your heart, even just a little. And if it did, let's take a breath together and look at it with kind eyes, the way we would if we were sitting across from each other, cup of tea in hand. This story was never just about inheritance or even about a woman drawing boundaries. It's about awakening, about recognizing our own worth after years of being diminished by those closest to us. Margaret's journey reminds us that healing doesn't always come with thunder and applause. Sometimes it comes quietly, in a firm no, in reclaiming your time, in investing in someone who sees your heart and not just your checkbook. There's a line that echoes Margaret's path. You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. Margaret did just that. She didn't fight with rage, she led with clarity. She let love back in where it was real, and she let go of what only masqueraded as love. In doing so, she discovered peace. To anyone out there feeling unseen, unappreciated, or taken for granted, let this story remind you, you are allowed to choose yourself, and it's never too late to begin again. If this resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. We tell stories that matter, ones that heal, ones that help you feel a little less alone. And if you stayed till the end, thank you. That says something beautiful about your heart. Let's keep walking each other home, one story at a time.